El Paso, welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz, and I teach philosophy here at EPCC.
And my name is Jules Simon. I'm a professor of philosophy at UTEP. And today, we're very happy to have as our guest Professor Keith Pannell, who's been living here in El Paso since 1971 when he joined the chemistry department at UTEP and began what can only be described as an illustrious and successful career as teacher, mentor, researcher, professional academic, and radio talk show host. Dr. Pannell took his bachelor's and master's degree in chemistry from Durham University in England, the third oldest university in England, following only Oxford and Cambridge, and did his Ph.D. degree in silicon chemistry from the University of Toronto, the leader and by far the most important and biggest research-intensive university in Canada. He has held numerous postdoc and research fellowships before he joined UTEP in 1971. And once he got here, he became a member of the American Chemical Society and other national and local professional chemistry societies. I hope I got that right, Keith. He's also edited or worked on the editorial boards of international, national, and regional science journals and serves on the editorial board of the ACS journal, Organometallics, the Journal of the Mexican Chemical Society, and the Texas Journal of Science. He was elected fellow of the ACS in 2015. He applied for and received millions of dollars in federal grants to support his work in science, with much of that money earmarked to support work in his lab and the student research groups, such as the MARC program at UTEP. He has published more than 280 articles in international journals, presented more than 300 seminars at university or institutes in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Australasia. At UTEP, he received the Distinguished Achievement Award for Teaching Excellence and Research Excellence, and in 2006 was appointed as a prestigious Welch Lecturer by the Welch Foundation. He has served as Associate Editor of the Texas Journal of Science and was elected a Fellow of the Texas Academy of Science in 2021. Finally, Professor Pannell devised and hosts a weekly public radio program called Science Studio, broadcast weekly on NPR, and which received the Texas Public Health Association Media Award in 1992. The intent of the show is to share in the ever-progressing world of science by exploring the inner workings of contemporary science. Much like our Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, Professor Pannell's desire with the show is to stimulate his listeners to think, question, and appreciate how science impacts them and their world. Only in our case, we would like our viewers to appreciate how philosophy impacts them and their world. And so, to our first question.
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm happy to be here. And it's very entertaining to watch you have to read all this off of a screen. I think it would be, you should just read it once and then make it up as you go along. But it's very difficult.
I want to give credit where credit is due.
Oh, but
in
you
an
could make it up.
illustrious and successful career. I actually wanted to put in there, Keith, that I actually think you're an academic superstar.
Well, let's go to the
wonderful work.
Let's go to the first question.
Yeah, no, I also want to say, I want to talk a little bit about, before we go into that, I've known Keith almost for 30 years. I know, it's a long time. And I'm just really thankful that you are here, Keith, because I really believe that the students here in El Paso deserve faculty like yourself, and that's how we met. We met through a grant that Keith had gotten to help science and engineering students become more familiar with the humanities, to help them be successful in their careers. And so I was what was called a peer leader, and we taught a class together. Well, not really, we didn't co-teach the class. I was an undergrad in philosophy, and Keith, of course.
You remember this?
I remember, and because of his efforts to help the students, and I really believe, I wish we had more of you, more faculty like yourself.
Oh, I appreciate it. Okay, I mean, we do now. Let me just say, as a plug for UT Paso, we have come strides since I came. Research was just beginning to be thought of as an appropriate activity in the College of Science, and I was hired specifically. I was told by my chair, "You're being brought over here from England directly, no interviews, just all paper." Guy liked me, he was an Anglophile, and they hired me. And he said, "You're just here to start research, get research going, and the rest will take care of itself." Now we're this famed, Carnegie Tier 1 institution, and it's just wonderful to see how well we've done, and with all the other wonderful faculty that they've brought into the campus. So it's a transformation. I'm proud to have been there from the beginning to where I am now, I must say that. And I'm proud to see what the institution has transformed into.
You have been a key part of a lot of students being successful in their research.
Yeah, good.
So thank you.
And along those lines, I met you 15 years ago, and where you visited a class we were teaching in the classroom building in 2007. I think it was 2007, on ethics and science, because you were looking around to recruit people to help in the MARC program. And so it was through that encounter where you sat through that whole class. You sat through that whole class, right? But then recruited me to help you teach in the MARC program, to teach the bioethics, the science and ethics course that we developed.
Right.
Yeah.
The MARC program, for those out there who don't know what it is, it's an acronym for Minority Access to Research Careers.
Right.
Politically, that title has sort of been transformed into maximizing access to research careers, but the bottom line is it was a program focused on underrepresented practitioners of science and bringing more into the mainstream. And it's been a lot of fun, wonderful students. They've gone on to get faculty positions all over the country, not as many as I would have liked, but good institutions. Harvard's one of them.
Yeah.
Okay. UT Paso is another one.
Yep.
Anyway, so we've done well, or the institution has.
Yeah.
Keith, what is the best thing about being a scientist for you?
Oh boy. Okay, so the best thing about being a scientist. First of all, let's just talk a little bit about what is science.
Okay.
Right? I mean, that's much answering a question, what it's good to be, a call girl, and you know what a call girl is. Science, for me, is observation and experiment of really what is the physical world that we see, all right? So, Newton saw the apple drop, so the story goes, and wondered. And then he came up with the concept of gravity and so on and so forth. And over the years, people have made observations and proposed hypotheses that have sort of developed into theories, and there are even some which are now called laws. But the point is, it was all done by observation and then subsequent experiment. So for me, the fun part about science is there are hypotheses out there that apply to known systems, but then there's a whole area where it's unknown. People don't know, especially in chemistry, what happens when you take this object, that object, and try to put the two together to form a bond. Will it work? And what happens if you shine light on that? Mm-hmm. These are the things. So the best part of it is to design your own experiments, to test out ideas, or just to simply say, look, I don't know what's going to happen if I do this, and then do it. Now, to do that, you need funds, you need money. And so you've got to somehow, and it's a privilege to be in such a position, society has got all the right in the world to say, hey, look, what's the point of that though? Is it just to satisfy my curiosity? Well, first and foremost, yes. Because if it doesn't do that, then what flows from that would not be deep inside. But the other thing is, how does that help us as a society progress? And I would simply tell you that fundamental knowledge that was not known at the beginning of a year, after you've done a series of experiments and research and analysis, we're better off because we know more. And we've trained practitioners. That's the other important point. Science isn't just about getting a scientific knowledge. That's very important, and that's the fun part in one sense. But the other is training the next generation. And if we don't do that, then it will sort of stultify. So it's two things that make the most fun to me. Designing what I think are really entertaining questions to be experimentally investigated, and then having a team of young people, students, graduate, postdoctoral, whatever, to go out and buy in to the enthusiasm that I think I try to bring. So the two parts, what make me excited is the team, and then doing things that no one else has done on a small scale.
Can I pursue this a little further? Yeah, let me pursue this a little further.
This is a conversation or dialogue,
yeah,
I've forgotten.
So, but it has to do with what you just said about these 2 points, these two different options. And one, as philosophers, we talk a lot about something that's good in itself, right? So we, if something is good in itself, then we distinguish that from something that has utilitarian or instrumental value. So you're doing something, so what's it good for in society? Which
right.
is, the second part. So first you raise the question about something that's going on that you're trying to understand, right? And that in itself is a pleasure, right? But then the second part is, are you looking at this thing that you find in the world, these different elements, right? Are you putting them together to create something that's going to solve something in society, or that's going to get you somewhere in society? So what's the instrumental value? And my question is, did you personally come to science through the love of doing science and these kinds of experiments, the small experiments, like you say, that satisfy your curiosity or pique your curiosity, or because you saw that science was doing something good for the world?
Okay. Let me say right from the beginning, I understand
He's
the
a
dichotomy.
philosopher, you can tell because of the long question, right?
But you see the difference, right? There's
well, of course I see the
practicing
difference.
science, it just should be captivating, right?
Well, how do I answer that? First of all, I didn't want to become a chemist, all right?
Okay.
I think I was always, mathematically I wasn't challenged, so therefore it was facile to learn about scientific processes, procedures, because math is at the fundament of all of these. But it was my school teachers in England, with the parents I lived with, they all ganged up and said, look, you're going to go and into the sixth form. I was 16. It's a big transition, 16 to 18. Mm-hmm. So you leave school or you carry on for 2 more years. And I was given the option of chemistry, physics and math, or what I wanted was geography and geology and French. And the ultimatum I was given was, well, if you want geology, geography and French, we will find a job for you. And at first I was naive. I thought they meant for the summer between the removed form and the sixth form, but they were serious. I'd have to leave school. And so I said, well, look, I'm not going to go out and work, so I'll do my science in a different way. So that's the reason. So it wasn't my choice to begin with. What I use the science for, the chemistry, is always my choice. And I've never really been in the camp, which is an absolutely fundamentally important camp, that's trying to solve a societal problem. That is not where Keith functions, except in the area of education, right? Trying to train the next generation of people who want to go out and be surgeons or want to do basic research in viruses and whatever. But for me, Keith, that wasn't ever on the cards. The problems of the world were just so big and I was so tiny that I thought, no, I will simply try to find out new information in a dusty corner of the periodic table, which you will remember, this big, and I focus on a few elements over here. And that was always the game that I played. I wasn't trying to do a big societal solution. I was trying to say, look, here's a corner of the periodic table. Very little is known about how these elements bind to one another. And certainly nothing is known about when you transform those elements from their normal place and put them into a different part of the periodic table by bonding them to other elements that nobody had done before. So it was an adventure. It's rather like getting into the to the boat and heading for the horizon. You know, you could drop off. Nothing could have happened. I could have wasted a few years and that of my team and found nothing, but we found a whole new area of chemistry. It's not solved a world problem in the slightest, but it has increased the knowledge of people to understand other aspects of chemistry and of science. And I suppose I could say one thing. There was a time where we were making polymers. These are long chain materials that had some of the same elements, silicon and the transition metal from a different part. And these became actually quite useful new materials, but only through other people, not through me. Just happens I was working in the area and that helped people understand their potential. But I'm not one for solving the world's problems.
I want to ask the next question based on this. So you've mentioned that science has satisfied your own personal curiosity.
Yes.
But of course it helps the world problems. What is the best thing about science?
Well, the best thing about science is, the best thing about science, that's, from my personal satisfaction is one thing, societal satisfaction is a total another. Best thing about science, we're all living longer and healthier, all right? Scientists set up experiments, they make new materials, and these new materials can be very useful for hip replacements, which you couldn't do that 50 years ago very well. We've got very good understanding of how the eyes work through basic fundamental research. So most of the public will understand good science because it produces something good for them, all right? And so they will think, they'll put scientists on a on a pedestal perhaps. And when you're up there, all of a sudden you realize that the work you're doing, or that the science in general is doing, has enormous societal value. But not all scientists start out with that in mind. It's just a group within the big subset that says, hey, because of this, maybe. And for example, this genetic splicing that's become extraordinarily important for curing all sorts of hereditary diseases. You know, the people who did that didn't think of the end result particularly. They just thought, hey, can we take this piece of genetic material and this piece and put them together, all right? And they did. And then they found out, well, they could take another piece of genetic material, cleave it in the middle, and add a new piece in, and then close it back up. And that has led to just wonderful new medicines. And that's what the public likes. The public, this is a problem with science, we're not very adamant about things, right? I do a chemistry result, I get something new, I've got to repeat it several times before I'm really convinced that it wasn't just something in the atmosphere in the lab that day. So that's the first thing. We have to reproduce, and reproduce. And then we'll say, well, we think that this looks like, we could generalize it to a hypothesis and maybe, well, we'll leave it at that stage. The public's not comfortable with that. The public likes binary systems, male, female, up, down, yes, no. Scientists aren't very good at that.
Are
just
or are
not.
not? No, they're not.
They're not.
No, and we shouldn't be. But that causes us right now, in this day and age where we are, February 2022, science is under a bit of an attack because people out there say, oh, well, you know, they can't be certain about it. There may be other reasons for global warming, pandemics, or reasons that not everybody gets cured by a vaccine. And it's our role right now, in fact, to fight back against this and point out to everybody that binary systems are very unusual and far and few between.
What is the scientist's attitude towards the fact that humans are fallible? That we humans would make mistakes?
Well, we understand that we will make mistakes. I mean, I can tell you, I got friends down in, let me get very precise here, Caltech, and some other friends up at Berkeley. Fellow in Caltech does an experiment, right? And he does it in a very controlled environment and gets a result. But he was clever enough to know, well, maybe there's just something in the environment where I am. So he sent the systems up to Berkeley to be reproduced, and it didn't function properly. There was something in the environment that he was unaware of that made the chemistry, in this case, distinctive. So we understand, you know, it's not fallibility, it's just there are other ingredients in there. You take a deep breath, I can still do it, that's good. And I think, well, you know, oxygen, nitrogen, CO2, but there's all sorts of other little things in there that we don't even think about, all right? And if you don't have the environment really well controlled, those tiny little extra materials can cause havoc and change the nature of the whole thing. What is this business about butterflies flapping their wings
the
in
butterfly effect.
Rhodesia and all sorts of hell happening in El
Used to be
Paso?
called chaos science.
You know,
But I
yes.
think it's interesting because, you know, you would think that by now we would know that we make mistakes, but we still want certainty.
Well,
That's where it's coming from. This
well, that's society. more
right,
than,
right, pointing out how hypotheses are still
Yeah.
not certain, and how maybe we should do away with science because they're not giving us certainty. Is our very deep desire for certainty, our human deep desire for certainty.
There's a
But
simple. if I
we're
can
not going to get there.
address. We're not. In theory, it's possible, but in practice, there's an experiment I do when I teach a class, as long as the class isn't too big. So anywhere from 20 to 40. This works. You walk in, you've done your own homework because you've taken the time to count exactly how many people are in the room. And then sometime in the middle of the class, you'll say, well, I've got a question for you guys. I said, I'm going to give you 10 seconds or 5 seconds. Tell me how many people there are in the room. You know, and I after 5 seconds, I say, that's it. You've done the experiment, or 10. And then I say, now, please tell the truth, right? What was the number you came up with? And then you begin to realize what an experiment is. They begin to realize this, that how seriously did they take it? And so it's a wonderful experiment because they at least all go out thinking, my goodness, you know, what a range of results, anywhere from, let's say, 18 to 40. Well, that's a big chunk if the number was actually 32, right? So it's a good experiment and should teach people that experimental activities are at the mercy of the people doing the experiment, and if they are part of that, they have a responsibility too.
That's interesting because they also have a responsibility to the truth. I mean, you contextualize that by saying, and please tell the truth, right? So there's a standard, right? There's a standard that goes along with setting up experiments and seeing them full, you know, through to the end. And so,
because I can say to that, when I first did this, I didn't bother to tell them to, you know, keep that number in mind. But if the number is, let's say, 33, and then their responses as I went through got closer and closer to 33, either down or up, they began to see what other people had done and therefore manipulated their own answer, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, because who wants to be embarrassed by not having the right answer?
Well, but that's of course what science is supposed to be, right? You're not supposed to be embarrassed by getting the wrong answer. You've got to be tickled pink. Boy, I did this experiment, and look, this isn't what the textbook says, or this isn't what common, you know, what do you call it, societal knowledge tells us is going to happen.
Were the expectations for my hypothesis? So in this case, you know, that colleague of yours where the experiment had to get transferred to another lab.
Oh, I mean, that's a very salutary point.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing about reproducibility, and I have to say it since I've got the floor here, that there is now an unfortunate tendency for people to cut corners, even in science, right? I mean, one grows up in science, and I believe that most of the people that do it, the vast, vast majority, totally ethical, good people.
Yeah.
They know the parameters of what they're supposed to be doing. They take it seriously. But there are always, it's a human activity, right? Science is not something, at the moment, done by robots and computers. That's going to come, absolutely. But at the moment, we're still, it's a personality, people type activity. And so there will always be people cutting corners. And I will tell you a statistic. If you take, what are the journals? There's a journal called Cell, there's another one, Nature, and there's another famous one, I can't remember. Some people working down at Rice and also at MARC did an analysis about 5 or 6 years ago. They looked at what you might call the results from clinical research, all right? And then they tried themselves, and these are good people, they took the time, set up the laboratory, got the co-workers to try to reproduce, and a large number of these, mainly the clinical research. And they came to a conclusion, 2/3 they couldn't reproduce. Now, that has to be explained. And when the public get hold of that, oh boy, they just say, see, these scientists are no better than the used car salesman. And I've bought cars from used car salesmen. I know some, they're okay people. But the point is their reputation isn't good. Scientists have, hopefully holding on to, a good societal reputation. But if you cannot reproduce it, what does that mean? Now, clinical work is involving patients quite often, or living systems. So much more complicated than anything I do in a laboratory, where I take inert pieces of pure material that is reproducible sine qua all the time. But the fact that there are things out there, important things that are not reproducible, scientists, the endeavor is losing a little credibility. And there are a lot of people out there that want scientists to be shoved aside, right? You do the science, we'll think of the policy, we'll think of the right way to think about these issues. We'll need you, we'll call you. We're going to be shoved aside like a sect. I'm very much afraid of that.
I want to ask a follow-up question, Keith. What is the relationship that scientists have towards the truth?
Well, I mean, that's what we're looking for. Whatever the truth is a wonderful word. We all think we know what it means, but by God, it's very complicated. But we all are there trying to devise experiments that will actually, in one way of looking at science is that when you devise an experiment, perhaps the best thing that could happen is that you disprove what everyone's been thinking. That's why we do experiments. I mean, I do experiments because I enjoy them, but when something happens that's unusual or was not predictable or is even counter to the current ideas, then you know you've hit gold. Right? So I mean, we're always looking for results that we can reproduce, and if they counter the regular normal truths, then that truth was ersatz.
It's not really true. So you get to the truth by being wrong, by figuring out how we are wrong.
You certainly can do, yes. All right. I mean, it's a nice way to put it. Go out there and try to be wrong. It's another way of saying, do the experiment, and if you've done it properly, it will either conform with or disagree with traditional truth. Yeah.
And maybe this is why the human tendency to want to be right and to want to have certainty is what is driving this attitude that you're talking about.
Marginalizing science and scientists.
Yeah, I mean,
on a broader scale.
this societal need for binary systems, yes or no, correct or incorrect, I think is something that we should just say, hey, that's not the way the world is. That's not the way people are. I mean, most people are good people, but they've done some inappropriate things in their life.
Right.
I've gone through a red stop sign before. That was an accident. No, it wasn't. I just didn't see it was red.
Yes,
my problem, before I got my eyes redone, I didn't see the sign.
Well, I've got my eyes done, as you well know, and my vision is worse than it ever was.
Oh yeah, science gone awry. There's a lot of things that came up in my mind as you were discussing with Kim some of these, your answers to these questions in this dialogue we're having. And one of those is, it's on our list, is the element of creativity in science. So do you find yourself just working from other people's hypotheses, or is part of the impulse of science to really create new polymers, or to just figure out how the world works, or is it to transform the world by creating new things or something like that?
That's certainly part of the imperative, right? I mean, especially for people. Look, today, what are the big issues? The big issue is the climate, all right? And the second big issue, as far as I'm concerned, is energy, all right? Which means, from my limited perspective, it means really harnessing the sun for solar energy, which means also then developing a whole new series of very efficient batteries. I mean, if I had to say where is the future for mankind, it's clearly not going to be without energy, all right? If we're going to survive in any form that's enjoyable, all right, there's nothing wrong with the pursuit of happiness. In fact, I delight in that phrase in the American history. Where else does anybody say this and the pursuit of happiness?
In Bhutan.
Yeah, right, in good time. But so going back to it, yes, the driving force for new batteries or new materials, etc. There are a lot of people working on that now, because the world is focusing attention on the fact that we are in a climate that's dramatically changing, and we're not ready to cope with it yet. We can't continue to burn coal. We can't continue to, just burn all the natural resources. The only real natural resource that we have that won't go away is the sun. Well, a lot of people are putting a lot of good work onto that, and that's something I would, in fact, say to young scientists now. Go out there, work in this area, use your creativity, find a way to take carbon dioxide. Everybody's bête noire at the moment, and reduce it back to something useful. That is, reacting it with water, at some stage hydrogen, to get back something more useful. So I think I remember there was an article I read, 1938 or something. The British government got a lot of scientists together, said, what's going to be the big discoveries that are going to happen over the next 15 years? Now the war clouds are on the horizon. And I think this committee came back and said, a way to make synthetic rubber. All right. Now, synthetic rubber was wonderful, but, it turns out the supply lines for rubber to England came from Malaysia, right? And so they were so focused on where they were today. I think it's not inappropriate to be like that right now. We have these existential issues of climate change, pandemics, energy, and if we don't really focus. So I think people like me are almost going to be anachronistic dinosaurs because I came in sheerly for the fun, for creating, in this dusty periodic table of mine, drag out those elements over there in group 14, play around with them, put them next to one another, put them in another environment. I had no problem to solve other than create the new molecules, and I had, I suppose, some gut feeling that something interesting would happen, but I didn't know. But it wasn't focused as I believe today we ought to be more focused.
Yeah, but so the issue you're talking about, though, is, you know, what I would refer to earlier as something being good in itself versus having instrumental value,
Yeah.
right? One of the questions that we have here is, you know, do you think science is primarily an individual endeavor, or does it take a community, right? Do you need many, many people involved in the projects, right? But at some level, what you were saying, out of your own experience, is you just had this genuine curiosity to see how these things worked.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that drew your interest and therefore your energy, and eventually got you to the point where, yeah, science is fun and it's good for people. You know, it's
Well,
good for
I
the
mean,
world.
yes, but can society afford that?
Yeah,
Society has, you know, I have a responsibility. I've had a good salary from the state. I've had a lot of money from federal government,
Right.
from all sorts of places. All right. With accepting that comes a certain responsibility.
exactly.
I can slough off a little of the responsibility off my shoulders and say, look, but I've at the same time created these new, very good creators in science, the students that worked with me. And therefore, that's partly answering the responsibility that I have.
Yeah.
I think nowadays, I do believe that individual scientists, and I collaborate, because there are techniques, usually it's somewhere nice like Budapest. I remember once I was told I needed some crystal structures, and so I tried to put a proposal together, go to Budapest. And NSF said, well, Keith, that's fine. We understand the logic, but why not work with, and I won't mention the lady's name, it was very good. I said, well, look, wait a minute, where is she? She's at Oklahoma State. That's Stillwater. I want to go to Budapest. And the people in Budapest were better. They were experienced. And the fellow just laughed. He said, oh, okay. And they funded it. So they realized also that there's a social aspect to science. And we'd be foolish not to acknowledge that.
Oh, I love, that's a wonderful answer. That's a really great answer. Yeah, because if you're not enjoying your work,
Yes.
there's something,
Yeah.
something not good is going to come out of that. You know.
Probably you're right. I mean, it's yes. There's the other thing that I tend to tell myself, but anyone who'll listen, that whatever your occupation, and I'm talking clearly here of scientists, find time to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a firm believer in that. I'm not even sure I know what it means, but every time I try to do nothing, something is happening.
Yeah.
Whether it's I'm listening to a Mahler symphony, you know, and recharging myself, or, you know, an idea might pop in and pop out, or a conversation may float to the surface. So many of my colleagues, especially academic administrators, have no time. No time at all. I got a good friend, Michael Eastman. We both came in the same year.
Mm-hmm.
He went away to be a chair here and a dean there. He came back to be a dean here about 15 years ago, I forget exactly when. And I thought, that's great. Mike and I will get together again, go up and down to some of the pool holes on North Mesa, you know, and catch up where we had been. Poor bugger didn't have any time. He was always at meetings. His whole day was classified. And that's a pity. Luckily, I don't have any of that issue.
Yeah, I targeted I was targeted on that particular issue in my class today. We were finishing up Aristotle and talking about the importance of leisure and how important that is just for thinking in itself. So one has to have this time, downtime, where nothing's happening, where you just have the opportunity for thoughts to arise
Yeah.
or for connections to happen. And you can't have that if you're always engaged in war. Right?
Yeah. So Aristotle was a firm believer in downtime and
Oh yeah,
Oh,
I mean, you
I
need
see.
time for contemplation, and this is when fundamental science happens, right? Fundamental knowing happens in those times where you can think of the laws of the universe or the laws of the, the microverse, the very small or the very large. And he said that's the most pleasurable thing, when you can just see how the universe is working, right? But it takes leisure downtime, right?
So in a way, Keith, you've already answered the question. The question is whether there is time in the scientist's day to think philosophically. And so I guess it depends on the type of scientist that you are. And I think obviously we have different methodology, but we're concerned with similar questions to find out what is real and what is true. And you bringing up this this issue of how humans, you say society, but to me it's humans. Humans have a strong desire for binary systems, for either right or wrong, true or false, right? What other alternative might there be?
for people to recognize that there is a continuum from A to Z, all right? And that B has got a little bit of A, very little of Z, but P may have equal amounts of both, and apply that to their own daily lives. I mean, I'm not a psychologist.
So he's mostly good, but there are days that he's having an off day.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make him a bad person. It's just that day it was an off day.
Of course, it does
It was
depend
just
what
a
the bad
cranky
is.
day, a creaky day.
What the bad is, I mean, there are parameters here to play with, but nothing is. Look, I think I have a secret admiration for, and this isn't originally my concept here. There's a very famous Nobel laureate, Raoul Hoffmann. He's a theoretician. He was a chemist. He's also an artist, and he writes poetry. I'm sure he plays the music. Raoul Hoffmann, in terms of, when people do something that's wrong, or people who fabricate, he said, one way to deal with this is just leave it alone. The fabricated stuff will simply drop out of sight. I don't disagree with it, except that it can waste an awful lot of people's time and energy. All right.
It would waste a lot of people's lives, actually. I mean, if you push it far enough to create, genocidal policies, the big lie can turn out disastrously.
But what I was going to say is that I have this
I went to
admiration.
the dark place right away.
Yeah, I want to go there soon too.
I have this admiration for people who actually do attempt to set social policy or political directions. Even if I disagree with them, they've made a stand that Keith generally doesn't. I have all sorts of opinions, all right? I think that this health system would be better than the one we've got, or whatever it is. But they've made a decision and are prepared to stand by it.
But how do you know that that decision is made out of good intentions?
Yeah, that's not quite where I was going. I'm just saying I do admire people that do come out with a stand in the end.
Well, he did qualify that, though, that he's often aligned with, that he could be aligned with, that it was, and therefore it's good.
And this brings us to the dark side question, which is we've danced around it, and I'd like to talk more about it. Is there a relationship between science and politics? And if so, how would you characterize it?
I think that the two are almost always on a collision course, all right? But for the very reason that I said, I have admiration for the people in politics, or for judges, guilty, not guilty, whatever it is. They have to make decisions. People like me can just say, well, of course, this is what I would have done, but I never have taken that responsibility. Rightly or wrongly, the people that stand for political positions have taken a position, and if they don't like what the scientists come up with, then we, to a certain extent, have ourselves to blame. We haven't articulated it properly. We haven't fought with them enough when they've uttered ridiculous statements. We just said, oh, well, that's who this fellow is. And, people recognize the foolishness. I think we need science, and scientists need to be much more engaged. That'll take time away from their basic research and teaching. A lot of people will say, well, that's not what I'm good at. Perhaps you've got to learn to be good at something that you previously thought leave to other people.
And I think science and philosophy both share that when it's not in the interest of whoever is in power, they'll dismiss us. But when it is in the interest of those who is in power, they will say it's scientifically backed up. It is. We use logic to show how this is a sound argument or a valid argument. So the logic has been used, science has been used or dismissed depending on those who are taking a stand.
Any piece of information is used by everybody for their own particular punto vista. I mean, that stands to reason, all right? Some of it can be correct because some pieces of information are not like this. It's not, yes, it is right, or no, it's not. It is part of this continuum. So that's just the human condition. I think it is.
I like where you got to in distinguishing the characteristic traits of, say, the politician versus the scientist. Because I think philosophers share in that, and that's holding off on making the decision. So a scientist holds off on making a decision until you're pretty sure it's almost absolutely unimpeachable.
Right.
Right?
And philosophers don't get there.
Well,
they keep asking more questions.
They keep asking more questions, right?
Yeah.
The truth is always going to elude us, right? But I think it's a really important point, and some of the dangers that you also signaled arise in that too. So where are our politicians coming from? They're coming from those people who are recruited who are not going to make, or not going to hold back on the decision making.
Yes.
And like
the
technocrats, right? Techno engineers, right? A whole class of give me the job to do and I'll set up the system and this is how it's going to work, rather than questioning the original premise, right?
Yeah, I think that there's an element of truth to that. I don't quite know how one gets around that, except, well, I can look at the American system. So it's so different. I mean, when I first came here and I found out I could vote for a judge, I thought, well, this is a bit bizarre. I don't ever think of voting for a judge in Britain. There, and in Britain I grew up with a great respect for what you would call here federal authority, I suppose. Mm-hmm. It had worked well enough over the centuries. It got better and better and better. So the idea of a judge being someone that someone else has poured $500,000 into to get him into that chair, and then it's got no problem with having to deal with this person in some legal case later, if they don't recuse themselves, that's strange to me, very strange. In the end, what's the solution? I do believe in the concept that society as a whole can make better decisions than me, you, individually, all right, or a committee of us. There's a common sense, because society, big society, is full of people trying to make their way in life under the most strenuous and difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. They understand better than most people what we call common sense, I suppose. Maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but I like the idea that everybody should therefore have to participate. Now in Australia, it's against the law not to vote. It's a very simple idea, all right? Over here, of course, federal government can't tell you what to do. At least the federal government can't tell Texas what to do, but the governor of Texas can tell the government or the council in El Paso what to do. It's just a whole series of ridiculous rules and regulations that have been entrenched to
It's like
facilitate the ruling class.
It's like a Monty Python show.
Oh, yeah, but not as damn funny. Okay, but I would say that you know, if everybody had to vote, that's part of the, you know, if you want to live in this country, then you've got to vote. You can say, well, they'll just vote for famous people. You know, once or twice that'll be the case. But at least there'll be everybody together, I think, is going to have a better outcome than just those who are trying very hard. The primary system, this has got nothing to do with science, but the primary system in this country just brings out the worst, as far as I can tell. The ones who are really hopping mad to get in this particular person or that one, they tend to dominate because they're the people that we all get to vote for in the end. We never voted for them in the beginning.
Not just because he's also British, but what you're just saying reminds me of John Stuart Mill on Liberty from Mill. He has a section on freedom of speech where he really believes that if we keep speaking with each other, we will figure it out. He has this fundamental faith in humans that individually we are wrong, we're often wrong, but all together, and this is why it's so important for us to have freedom of speech.
Okay.
And so I think I'm just in the back, I'm sitting here talking to you, but in my head I'm thinking, it's very scientific, you know. It's this sense that individually I could be wrong, my experiment, but all together we're building on each other's mistakes to get closer to the truth, whatever that may be.
Every new generation, well, the famous, you know, on the shoulders of giants and all that good stuff.
But I'm thinking of subtitling our episode today, The Common Sense Scientist.
It's quite dull, quite boring, all right? Dull and boring.
You're making this appeal to the common sense of the people, right? And all that kind of stuff, and having great faith in that.
As long as there's not information being withheld.
Yeah,
it's all got to hang out, so to speak.
Right, in this binary pair, common sense and scientist, right? Do they go together? I mean, the scientist has to be, you know, not only in tune with what is the common sense, but also this standard, this at least implicit standard of what is the truth, right?
Yeah.
What is the case? You know, how are things?
There's one thing that needs to be said about science, the truth, ethics, all right? And that is that I just told you I've been known to go through a red traffic light, all right? It's usually at 3 in the morning, coming out of the campus, all right, and there it is, you know. But, and of course I went through it because I wasn't going to get caught. If, however, there'd been a policeman on the other side, I'd have waved and twiddled my thumbs until such time as everything changed. Science is a little bit like the second case, because we do recognize that if we do something egregiously incorrect, and of course put it out there, it's got to be published, there's going to be somebody out there, I've done it myself, who will bang off a paper saying, wow, these people in El Paso got it all wrong. All right, so there's an element of precaution, all right, when we publish, all right, and I think that's very healthy, because it stops to a large extent fabrication, falsification, because the chance of getting caught, it may be high, may be low, but once it's happened, you can just wash away whatever reputation you've built up over N years. So that's something within science.
Yeah.
In politics, they just say, I misspoke, and carry on to the next question. And that's the other thing. When a scientist puts something in writing, in the literature, it's there. If you say something in Congress or Senate and you don't like the way it sounds, you're allowed to go back in and change it. Or you're allowed to put in things that you never even said. unlike Hansard in Britain, where whatever somebody said, how was stupid, it's there on record forever. So there's a difference there. We will get caught, by and large, if we fabricate, falsify, lie.
Keith, we have a few more minutes left, and we've been peppering you with questions.
Do I have any questions for you guys?
Yes, do you have questions for
Yeah,
us?
okay.
That we can answer in a couple of minutes?
Do you know what the periodic table is?
Yes, I do.
Okay, what do you remember about it? What's this?
I remember the elements at the bottom.
Oh my God, woman!
I don't remember what they are,
Oh.
but I remember that they're
There's
there.
2 rows at the bottom.
Yes, and that is what is most interesting to me about that. The uncertainty, the unpredictability of, as a philosopher, I'm drawn to the uncertainty of within the certainty.
Yeah.
I can envision, I can picture the periodic table, but I can't tell you what the
No. But I mean, you know
things
how
are
it came about?
No.
Oh, I mean, there's a whole history there.
I really liked chemistry. It was one of my favorite classes as a junior in high school.
Yeah.
And I really
Well, I mean, it is.
enjoyed
16,
the class.
that's when you want explosions and smelly things.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's just,
Yeah, that's where all that curiosity came from.
the big thing about the periodic table, well, it's many. Many people helped to build it, but everybody remembers one name, Dmitry Mendeleev. You know, he was a Russian chemist in St. Petersburg. And why he is the one that we remember is because he was the first one to really put his reputation on the line by making a prediction. He said, look, I got all these elements, and we'll go across onto what we now call group 14. He said there's carbon at the top, then there's silicon, and then there's tin, and then there's lead. But tin doesn't fit in the rest of the periodic table. There's got to be something in between silicon and tin.
Which is what led to your book on tin, which I got at the end of our dialogue to refer to, right? You're an expert on tin.
So he just said, look, this element isn't known yet, 1870 or whatever, and he did this in several other locations, but he had the ganas to simply say, hey, there's holes in our knowledge here. And he even went on to predict some of the properties of the elements in these holes. And within 10 years or so, so be it. The compounder, the element underneath silicon, which he called Eka silicon for being underneath, it was found in Germany and they called it germanium.
Okay.
All right, and that's why
great.
he took that risk. He took the big risk. Could have been totally wrong, in which he'd be another footnote along with some of the others, but he was right.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful story to end our interview on.
Oh, good.
Demonstrate some of your just expertise, your storytelling expertise as well, right? But it brought together a lot of threads from our dialogue. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm glad. I've had fun with you guys.
This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, and our guest has been Dr. Keith Pannell from the Chemistry Department at UTEP. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz, Jules Simon. Thank you to our production team, and please join us next time.